Okay. That's what the Zahlers reads.
Reinu v'Rabbeinu.
Hi, Amos. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Thank God. Thank God. Beginning of the week.
Yeah.
Doing well. I'm really excited about today's
Monday.
topic.
What a way to start off the week, by the way. Just Monday morning minyan.
Ah.
Always good to start.
Monday morning minyan. Best way to start the week. Got coffee, whiskey, and herring. It's the only thing you need.
And Talmud Shiur.
And of course, the Talmud Shiur. But even if you don't stay for the Talmud Shiur, you still have the coffee, whiskey, and herring after tefillah. Plus, today we had Jacob read the Torah with Moroccan trup.
Yeah,
it was really special.
Really good.
Really special. He's going to read the whole portion on Shabbat too.
Yeah. So if you're in Wellington, come along on Shabbat. You'll hear some Moroccan trop.
Well, you're going to post this actually 2 days after.
Yeah,
the
but
Shabbat.
You know, you never know. You might twist his arm to read again.
Maybe.
You do that. You do that to me, so I'm assuming you do that to other people as well.
I'll try. You're still doing schmuck.
Okay, so today's subject is the infrastructure needed to build a Jewish community. And we'll start with a bit of Talmud, Monday morning, right? Mm-hmm. So this is from Masechet Sanhedrin, page 17b, or Yud Zayin Amud Bet, or Base, depending on how you speak. Bet. And it says that in order to have a Talmid Chacham, a scholar, come and live in a city, you need the following 10 things, which is a court empowered to punish the guilty. So, Beit Din. I'm guessing that's a Beit Din.
Mm-hmm. A Beit Din. You need a Beit Din.
Yeah.
It's in the context, by the way, Masechet Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
It's at the end of the first chapter, and it talks about building a Beit Din. You need a Beit Din of 3 people for monetary disputes. You need a Beit Din of 23 people for capital punishments.
Yeah.
And you need a Beit Din of 71 for essentially the Supreme Court, or the High Beit Din, where you judge kings and you decide to go to war and things of that nature, and they sat in the Beit HaMikdash. So it talks about, so you need a Beit Din, and you need replacements for the Beit Din and Dayanim, so you basically need 23
people.
Yeah, and possibly more, possibly
Plus.
3 sets of 23 people.
Yeah.
So anyways, at the end of this list, you get to 120 people, which is the same number of people in the Israeli parliament.
Yes.
And it's the same number of people
in the New Zealand parliament too.
In the New Zealand parliament.
Yeah.
And the same number of people in the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, the men of the High Assembly. So you need 120 people, effectively, to create a sustainable Jewish community, meaning city. In this case,
yes.
The focus is on building a city from scratch.
Yes. And for a Talmid Chacham to come in,
right? And for a Talmid
Chacham, must be.
You need these 120 people, meaning he'll be the 121st person. Okay, so now Bevchavod, read the list.
So, we have a Beit Din, a communal tzedakah fund. Tzedakah is charity for those who are not familiar with the Hebrew. A synagogue, a mikveh, which is like a bath for immersions. Sufficient bathroom facilities. A doctor, a bloodletter. I don't know why those are separate.
Bloodletter, a doctor is a mohel. To do Brit Milah, a bloodletter was a standard medicine. Today it would be a Western medicine.
Right.
But that was standard medicine.
And then
back then.
Yeah, so we have, i.e., a popular healer in brackets. So after that, there's a scribe, a butcher, and a Torah teacher for children. So the next question is, do we have those things?
Right. And again, a scribe, just to define it, is for writing Sefer Torah, writing mezuzot, gitin, different things that you need a scribe for divorces.
Yeah.
Right? So you need a scribe for a various number of things within Jewish law. These are all the things that you need in a city, meaning it's the minimum requirement for any Jewish community to function. Right? In general. So let's say you have a city, and you're on an island, or you're in an isolated location, without means of transportation anywhere else.
Yeah.
And you can get everything locally, which was the case for the most part, though not entirely, but for the most part, during Mesopotamia, during the Talmudic era, for the most part, it was local. Everything was local. And therefore, since everything was local, then you had to have all these things in your city. A city is like a town of today.
Yeah.
The city today is a huge metropolis.
Yeah.
So that's a very important distinction as well. Basically, you have your own town. You want to have the town called, Mitzpeh Amos. So there you go. You have Mitzpeh Amos, which I actually think is a real place.
Might be,
so, in Israel. So Mitzpeh Amos, and Mitzpeh Amos looks over where Amos the prophet used to be, which is actually technically in Tekoa, and that's why the main street in Tekoa is called Amos. That's a side point, neither here nor there. Mm-hmm. But Mitzpeh Amos, you want to have a city, you need these 120 people.
Yeah.
The Sanhedrin, the bloodletters, the Mohel, the scribe, the mikveh, you need a synagogue, you need 10 people studying Torah.
Yes.
You need a bloodletter, which is basically somebody involved in conventional medicine, or doctor of today, or naturopath, or whatever you consider conventional medicine, which you won't get into in today's topic.
Yeah.
But somebody to heal, a healer, essentially, an actual healer. And you also need a Jewish education. Somebody to teach the kids.
Yes.
Very important, by the way. So now the question is as follows. In this Talmud, actually, Amos referenced it, not me, which is really good, because just as an important point, that just because I'm a rabbi doesn't mean I always come up with all the sources all the time. Anybody can come up with sources, because anybody can learn Torah. Torah is for everybody, not just for rabbis. So I really want to congratulate Amos for bringing in a really valid source for our topic today.
First of many. First of many.
Amen. First of many. So now the question is, and this is something that's on my mind constantly, especially being the rabbi of the Wellington Jewish community, which is a relatively small Jewish community.
Yes.
It's not a mid-sized or large Jewish community. It's also not a micro-Jewish community like Nelson or Christchurch or Hamilton.
Small on the world scale.
Small on the world scale. The question is, how do you create for a small Jewish community, or even a larger one, or mid-sized one specifically, long-term sustainability versus a short-term need? And then, where do you put your emphasis? Out of all those things, if you, establish a new Jewish community, where do you put your emphasis? Where do you put your resources? Where do you put your time? Everything is limited.
Yeah.
So, where do you put your emphasis, resources, and time? And also, if a small Jewish community, instead of becoming smaller, more obsolete, and a dying, aging community, which many of these small communities become. Dying and aging, because everybody moves out to larger Jewish communities, and we'll get into that phenomenon.
Yeah.
How do you make it, how do you grow it, and how do you even sustain the people living in that Jewish community long term? And that is the question we're going to address in this podcast about building Jewish infrastructure.
So just to start, a bit of a fun question. If you had to pick one of those 10 things, what would be the first thing? What would you prioritize?
That's a really good question, because I'm debating between two things.
Which are?
One is a mikvah, because a mikvah is the most important structure in any Jewish facility for creating family purity. Any Jewish community, it's more important to build a mikvah than it is to build a synagogue. This is rooted in halachic sources. And that's also one of the reasons why in our Jewish community we decided to raise close to $250,000 New Zealand dollars to build a new mikvah, which is in the process of, it's been approved now by the board and by the community, and now it's past the AGM, which is very good, and now is at the engineering structural stages, and hopefully will be built within the next year or two. We have raised all the money for it.
Yeah.
It's in the bank and in a contract of a pledge. So we're really, really, really excited about it. Hopefully we raise all the money if it doesn't go over budget. So that's what we're hoping.
Yeah.
And the mikveh is very important because family purity. A woman that's nida, a woman based on her monthly cycle, needs to go to the mikveh. We're not going to get into the laws, but without that, religious couples, or really all Jewish couples, but specifically within Jewish law, you cannot have intimacy.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important, because without that, you can't have family life. Family life and the home life is more important than the shul life.
Yeah.
which is also another topic. But in this context, you have to support family life first in a Jewish community. However, one could argue that if you don't have a mikvah, I mean, the worst case scenario, women can go to the sea, a river, or alternative sources. There's stories about that, which I won't get into. I even had one woman.
We have an abundance of that.
What?
Seas and rivers and...
Yeah, but who wants to go into the sea in July? It's freezing at night.
Yeah, and completely in the nude.
And also with Kiwis, reporting people to the police for skinny dipping.
Yeah.
It could happen. And police can come, sorry, ma'am, what are you doing? Well...
I think there's one nude beach in Wellington.
Is there? There is a nude beach, so you could go there. Yeah. That is true. It's by Miramar.
Yeah.
By Miramar, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah? Or Seatoun or Miramar?
I think it's...
Somebody told me about that.
Around from Seatoun to Miramar.
Somebody told me about that. It's around there. That's true. So, I mean, there is a place you can go legally, but again, who wants to go in the ocean? Yeah. Even in summer, it's freezing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not the same experience as a mikvah. You need a balanit. You need to clean up. It's a whole thing. It's not so simple. Mm-hmm. The reason I bring that up, that there are alternatives to actually dunking in a mikvah if you have a sea or a body of water or a river or otherwise. And people do that. I've heard lots of stories from men and from women. One woman shared a story, which is, oh well, that was interesting. But I tend not to bring these topics up with women. I outsource them to my wife because it's more appropriate that way. So
now it's out there to the world.
Well, one woman just came up to me without me approaching her, so it was kind of random. Anyways, the point is that there are alternatives, and the next important thing is Jewish education. I'll tell you a story. There's a person, I won't say his name, he's from Israel, from the north of Israel. He considered moving here. This was a conversation I had only by email about 3 or 4 months ago, I would say. A few months ago.
Yeah.
This person, he's a religious family. Because he is a doctor or works in the medical world, he had an opportunity to come here for a couple of years. And he basically would only come here. He asked me about the Jewish community. I told him, I gave him a whole spiel. The deal breaker for him was that there wasn't a Jewish school for his kid. I told him about Orot. I told him about our Jewish learning opportunities, that we're developing another one, which I'll kind of hint at here, because we're trying to develop another tier. In addition to Orot, we're not replacing what we have, because the great program that we have, but to give extra...
To build on that.
Yeah, to give extra education to kids who want that, and families who want that for their kids. We're working on a plan. We don't have details yet or a budget. But that's really important. And this person basically said, respectfully, I don't have to go to Wellington. If I did, I'd help you build it up. But since you don't have that, I'm inclined not to come. And he's not coming. So it is, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
People move. One of the first things they look at, where are my kids going to go to school? Yeah. What Jewish education are they going to have before they look at a mikvah, before they look at a synagogue, before they look if there's a mohel in the area, or where the Beit Din is, or anything else that's mentioned on this list. A scribe. People don't move to places because there's a scribe. People do move in and out of places because of Jewish education.
Yeah. So having said that maybe... So it's the mikvah and the education that are the big things.
In my opinion.
Right. A common man might say it's a synagogue.
Yes. Absolutely.
And what's the argument against that?
Well, first of all, it's nothing against the synagogue.
No.
To be clear.
But the argument against the synagogue being the priority.
Right. So it's a big debate whether you have... First of all, you usually don't have a Jewish education without a synagogue. So usually it's one and the same. The argument against it, I want to distinguish between two different things. There's a synagogue, which is a community center as we know it today.
Yeah.
And there's a synagogue for the sake of tefillah b'minyan. Right? Tefillah in the quorum, right? Essentially the regular prayers.
Yeah.
When it comes to regular prayers, you can pray on your own. You don't need a synagogue. It's better to have a synagogue. It's better to have Torah reading. But a person could do all the tefillot, without all the different halachic requirements, but the baseline of all the tefillot in their home. I know somebody, I've heard this from a rabbi who's a colleague of mine, who actually, even though they live in Israel, in a place called, I believe, Mishor Adumim, which is right just north of Male Adumim,
Yeah.
in the Judean desert there, close to Jerusalem. He has lots of shuls, lots of communities, even in Mishor Adumim. And he deliberately davens at home so that his kids could see him, set an example for his children, so they'll see him davening at home every day. So, meaning, as long as you have tefillin, a talit, and a prayer book, that's all you need.
Yeah.
So that meaning that's the argument against, not against the synagogue. Nobody's against synagogue,
prioritizing the
but
synagogue.
a mikvah you can't replace in your home.
No.
Although I have seen mikvahs in people's homes, and it does exist.
Yeah.
Relatively wealthy people or people that have very cheap property, like in the Golan Heights. I know somebody who literally has a mikvah in their home, but it's hard to maintain, and most people don't. And if you live in the city or in any town, 99.9% of Jewish people do not have a mikvah in their home.
Yeah.
Nor would they invest in it, even if they had the money. And Jewish education, I mean, we'll talk about online education, which is not exactly the same thing.
No, it's not.
But, so, it doesn't really replace it. That's just a supplement for if you don't have it. The teaching kids in your home, even just from personal experience, I'm able to teach my kids. I'm not able to teach my kids at the same level as a Jewish school would teach them.
Yeah.
It's just not the same. Because I'm one person, I have a job, and I see my kids, and it's bedtime, and I want to have quality time with them, and I don't just learn with them during school hours. They actually go to a school here, which is a great school,
Yeah.
right? And even on that note, for example, when I looked at this job, one of the most important things for me was the job,
Yeah.
and also the location. Okay.
Yeah.
The culture, location, I was flexible about that. My wife was the most important thing to her, where we send the kids to school.
Yeah.
And she, in fact, pretty much agreed to fly across the world because there was a Steiner school. Because we like the Steiner school system, which is not for everybody.
Yeah.
But because it was a Steiner school, which we send our kids to, even though it's a little bit expensive, we really invest in that. And that we believe in that education. And that was really important for her. Meaning, if there wasn't a Steiner school, it would have been harder for us to move here. I mean, I don't know if we wouldn't have moved here, but the point is that Jewish education is such an important factor in moving.
Yeah.
And where you live. That's the point. Really important point. People literally, as I told you with our story and with this person from Israel, the deciding factor on some level was education for the children.
Yeah.
A synagogue, though, as a community, is incredibly important for a lot of people. And then you could elevate the synagogue possibly to 2 or 1 on this list as well. Or 1A or 1B or 2A and 2B.
If you prioritize education and the mikveh, then it's a close third, for sure.
Right, well, synagogue also provides education. So you see, like, for example, our center has Jewish education built into the synagogue.
Yeah.
So then you get one and the same. But again, it's not... But if our synagogue was literally the Beth El Shul for the purpose of tefillot, I would argue that a mikveh is more important, hands down, no question to ask.
Yeah, which in the context of the Talmud, that's what a synagogue is.
Correct.
It
was also a place of gathering, but it's mainly for tefillot.
Yeah.
So you have tefillah b'minyan.
It's a place of gathering. It's called a Beit Knesset.
Right. Meaning, though, it is a requirement to build a whole city. Ideally, the list that you have in Sanhedrin is an ideal list.
Yeah.
Almost like a baseline list, but the question is, okay, I have $500,000, where do I invest my money in? That's the question, right? You have $3 million, right? And also, we have limited resources, or we can only do one project at a time. So you can do a lot of things. You can build up a shul, you can renovate a shul, you can bring in more people, you can bring in a kollel to a city. Right?
Yeah.
You can build an eruv. We haven't even talked about that yet.
No.
You can bring in a shochet. You can pay him a full salary, right? Or a partial salary. You could hire a rabbi, right? You could hire which rabbi, part of his job and part of my job is Jewish education. Mm-hmm. It's a very important part of my job.
Yeah.
Even this podcast is Jewish education.
Yeah.
Because we're informing people, we're educating people through the platform of a podcast, which is your idea, which is a great idea, right?
Yeah.
So, And there's a Beit Din also for courts, and the question is, do you need it locally? Can you outsource it? All these questions are a matter of cost.
Yeah.
If you brought all those people in, it would cost the community millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, but nothing's free. Like everything on this
Correct.
list would require a cost of some description.
Correct. Then how big do you build it? And do you make it a gigantic community center? Do you have membership? Do you drive up membership? Do you, all these questions. And there's a lot of variables in this. But the question is, let's say you have $1 million. So where are you going to put your money? Like a mikvah is going to cost you $250,000. Easy. Easy. I would say that's the first thing that you have to build. Or that and Jewish education. For children and also for adults. But specifically for children. I mean, for both today, but you really need to build up the education.
For children is where you start to get the adults interested.
Hopefully, but then if you don't have anything for adults, then they'll die out. What's the problem with small Jewish communities? Now we get to sustainability.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you your opinion. What makes a community not sustainable? Meaning, by the definition of that is when people will either not be part of the community but live in the city,
Yeah.
or leave.
So I think partially accessibility. So accessibility in the sense of how, when I go to the synagogue, say, am I treated like I want to be treated? That's like a side thing. It's not to do with people moving here. But say, as a Jew living in New Zealand, I'm going to shul, and let's say I went into shul and people say, no, you can't pray here because you pray in a different nosech to us. That's for one, would drive me away. I won't come to the synagogue. That's a different. It's slightly different in the to the questions that you asked. But in terms of sustainability, if New Zealand being the way that it is, I mean, we accept anyone pretty much that wants to come in and see what we pray like, how we function. But we trying to find the words. We don't distinguish ourselves as different. In other words, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew for us.
Yes, that's true. And that's a really, really important, a very unique thing we have in our community. In other communities, you're like, are you this type of Jew, that type of Jew? What's your affiliation? What's your...
For example, this morning we talked about Yaakov reading the Torah in the Moroccan Torah.
That's right.
You won't get that in other places.
Some places. Not
you
a
get
lot.
it in some places. Not...
That's right.
Most places you won't get that.
You go to the Sephardi shul or go to the Moroccan shul. In a yeshiva Hesder,
Which, by the way, go back to our second episode to learn more about different sorts of communities and things.
That's
Larger communities and smaller communities.
So you're saying...
So in terms of sustainability,
Yeah.
I think it's dependent on the people that are within the community.
Right. So meaning if they make it accessible, if they make it welcoming.
Yes.
They open the doors versus close the doors. But I'll ask you a question, which is really the elephant in the room.
In a way, it's the argument between Hillel and Shammai.
Yeah, absolutely. Shammai had standards, and Hillel opened the doors to everybody.
Yeah.
He had more students with Hillel, but with Shammai, the students were of a higher quality, but you got fewer students.
Yeah.
That's correct. And he drove more people away, and they had to find alternatives. They couldn't enter his Beit Midrash, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. There are, by the way, camps like that in Toronto and other places that'll say, and this is a real thing. I'm not even making this up.
I'm sure it's a big thing in larger communities.
Yeah, they'll say if you want to come to our camp, it's usually Orthodox or ultra Orthodox camps, really, not Bnei Akiva camps, but ultra Orthodox camps or Haredi camps. They'll say, if you have a television in your home, you cannot come to camp.
Yeah,
things like that. You would never have that in Bnei Akiva anywhere, let alone New Zealand.
No.
Where you don't even require people to be Shomer Shabbat. And they even now made an exemption in some cases, if somebody is in the process of conversion or considering it or not halakhically Jewish or dedicated to the community, they'll make some exceptions in that regard. Far cry from a lot of some, I should say, not a lot, but some of the ultra-Orthodox camps that will have a very strong vetting and screening process.
Yeah.
And they drive a lot of people away because they keep their communities much more insular.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying. We're insular versus open. The elephant in the room, though, with the Wellington congregation is we used to be a much larger community.
Yeah.
And now we're smaller. That's the elephant in the room. I mean, even the shul, it fits 850 people. And I have people that are the old guard, so to speak, here, of the older guard. I shouldn't say old. They're not old, but
the ones with I remember the.
I
days.
remember. Yeah, I remember when there was standing room only, and everything was full, and there was a choir, and you know who I'm talking about, right? The types of people. Some of these people, by the way, are intermarried themselves, which is part of sustainability.
Yeah.
We'll get into that, but still, they're dedicated to the community, which is great, and we welcome that. And that's very important. But what happened to all those people? They didn't stay.
Yeah.
Either some of them died, which happens, but they did have kids. But what happened to their kids? Why didn't their kids stay?
Well, here's the question. Well, I wasn't around, obviously.
Well, yeah,
and
I wasn't around either.
So the question was the community back then extramural or intramural?
That's a good question. I don't really have enough information about that.
Exactly.
I do know
and
there were different standards.
I don't know that we can answer
and the standards
that
of today, I think, were much more open than they were back then. Which is back then even like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
10, 20 years ago even. Maybe not 10. 15.
10 I can answer you about.
10 you can answer me. 15, 20, 25 years ago and before.
Yeah.
But even with Rabbi Van Staveren, who was in the 1920s and early 1900s, right? He grew the community from like 400 members to 1,200 members.
Yeah.
He even collected membership, £6 a year.
That's a good price.
Yeah, but his entire salary was £300 a year.
Yeah.
And he never got a raise. He had 13 kids. I don't know how I pulled that off. Anyways, I don't know. He's a very, very special person.
He must have had.
That's why
must have had an MBA and something.
Yeah, that's why he had a room named after him. And that, a mural, and an unbelievable rabbi. He really is. The more I read about him, very impressed. But he grew the community, right?
Yes.
With the people that were already here. He just engaged them. He was very engaging, and he was into education. And what happened is, I know what happened. And I spoke to kids of people here in the community. We're not going to say names or whatnot. And I say this, by the way, without judgment of anybody here in the community or without, no judgment, just fact. Facts don't care about feelings. So just fact. Facts.
That one guy from the States who's also a Jew that says that.
Yeah, I know. Well, I got that from Ben Shapiro. I like Ben Shapiro. So, facts don't care about your feelings. So, the fact is that people moved away because they wanted to be part of a larger Jewish community or because they wanted to make Aliyah. Aliyah is a completely separate discussion in its own regard because the Jewish people, that is their homeland, New Zealand or anywhere else, or Australia or Melbourne, is not a homeland. No. So is it important to build up the Jewish communities outside of Israel? Obviously, I think it is. So that's why we're talking about it. But moving to Israel, I would never persuade anybody, don't move to Israel. Even though I know some people here in the community who would actually argue, don't move to Israel because you have to build up your local community. That's an interesting debate.
It's a very interesting debate.
For our purposes, we're not getting into that because we're not going to get into that. We can talk about Aliyah.
That's different.
It is a different topic,
podcast.
But it does contribute to sustainability. But basically, whoever's going to move to Israel is going to move. The only I don't have a problem with any of those people.
No.
The David Sedleys of the world and anybody else, right? I think it's a great thing. Now, the people that moved to Melbourne or that moved to London or that moved to New York or Los Angeles to seek a larger Jewish community outside of Israel, moving away from their local Jewish community, and Wellington takes away from their local Jewish community. Looking for greener pastures.
Correct.
Now, that's the elephant in the room. A lot of people did that, which is why our community is significantly smaller than it was back then, even back in the 70s. So going back 50, 43 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, our community is significantly smaller because people moved away.
Only as it pertains to Jewish life.
We're only talking about Jewish life.
Yeah, but in that sense,
What do you mean?
say, tomorrow you get a job in the States.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an offer you can't refuse.
That's the question.
So
yes, no, I hear that.
Whether you should take that or not is a different question.
Correct. And look, there's a lot of variables. Meaning, again, I say this without judgment of people and people's personal decisions. I understand, right? And we're not saying they're bad people or good people. Or it was right or it was wrong. But fact is that if you had 2 jobs, one in Wellington and one out in Melbourne, the Melbourne job would probably pay you more. Just because Australian jobs pay more than New Zealand jobs.
Yes.
But if you want to, but if the deciding factor of you moving or anybody else is joining a larger Jewish community, that is the indication of I want to be in a long-term sustainable Jewish community, and I don't want to be in a small Jewish community that I don't perceive as sustainable. And then the question is how you build up those small Jewish communities as becoming sustainable, and what makes those Jewish communities any better? Is it just the amount of Jews living there?
Yeah.
Or is it something else? That's the elephant in the room.
So is it something else? That's the question.
Well, for example, you have many more Jewish education opportunities in Melbourne than you do here. By a lot.
That's interesting, because being someone who moved away from Israel.
Yes, me too.
In New Zealand, I find that I learn more about Torah and my Jewish learning is more expansive in New Zealand rather than Israel.
Yeah. Yes.
Like I went to a secular school when I was when I was in Israel. So I got the basics of this is the Tanakh, and you learn from the 5 books of Moses,
right?
And then you learn the Nevi'im and so on and so forth. But over here, I get more of an in-depth analysis into what the text is and what the text means, what it could mean, what the questions are. Learning Talmud, I wouldn't have done in Israel.
Right. Now that is, in my opinion, a completely separate discussion. Because that is a phenomenon which I find fascinating, and one of the reasons I actually wanted to search a community outside of Israel. Because outside of Israel, Jewish people are connected to a community, or they assimilate. It's like a hit or miss. It's all or nothing. Inside of Israel, you can be connected to the Jewish people, but not be fully committed to a Jewish community. You can say my definition of being in Israel is the army. That's a matter of Jewish identity. Don't think that's a matter of Jewish sustainability. In fact, is a lot of Israelis learn more Torah outside of Israel than they would inside of Israel.
Yeah, and when you talk about Jewish education,
yes,
I got the basics in Israel.
That's right.
But I didn't get the in-depth stuff in Israel.
Right. You could have, but you weren't.
I could have, but I wasn't looking for it.
But you weren't looking for it. That's right. And in many cases in Israel, you don't look for it because you're just living to survive there, and there's a lot of factors in living in Israel. But I do think, for example, if you were in Melbourne or if you were here, that's more of the discussion that's relevant. Because moving from Melbourne to here, again, the advantage, we talked about the advantages of living in a small Jewish community. These are some of the advantages. Like people like yourself get more involved.
Yeah.
People like your father get more involved. Richard Noah and Nelson gets more involved. Whereas in Manchester, he'd be in the back of the shul, very, very passive, go to some classes, not go to some classes, and really keep to himself. Versus now he's proactive, leading a Jewish community, doing a lot of things, bringing me out to consecrated Jewish cemetery. He'd never be involved in any of that in Manchester. Yeah. It would all be the United Synagogue or whatever else he'd join.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's the advantage of a small Jewish community. Now the question
Episode 2 was fantastic.
It really was.
You should listen to that.
It really was. And it's a very important one, and it connects.
Yeah.
This is where it connects. Now the question is, okay, that small Jewish community has advantages, but is it sustainable? And I just quoted a fact that this community has been, 70% of its members have left.
Yes, but the community still exists.
Correct. The community still exists, and the question is, how sustainable is it? Because the stigma is, when I came in here, that it's a aging, shrinking, dying community.
Yeah.
And, am I just here to, it's like be crude about it. Am I just here to bury everybody and then leave? I don't view my job like that. I think that's a horrible way for anybody to view a job. And I say that cynically, and I don't mean that. But, I mean, if you took it to the extreme, that's essentially what people are saying. We're aging, only dying. Just keep it going. Keep the ship going until the last person jumps ship and then take the ship, blow it up, and move out of here. That is not what I want to do.
Yeah.
Because that is... Then all I'm doing is filling short-term needs. This person needs to learn Judaism. That person needs to learn Judaism. There's still Jews that, religious people need some meat. So do the shechita. So then it's all reactivism and and just filling needs. Fill this need, fill that need, because you're the rabbi. Fill this, run services. As long as they're a minion, run services.
So what's the balance in that sense of being reactive versus being proactive?
So I want to build a long-term sustainable Jewish community here in Wellington. That's always been my goal. That's always been, and basically everything I do in my mind, even though I'm not part of the board, which is another dynamic.
Yeah.
So I'm not a representative of the community. I'm an employee of the community.
Yeah.
However, still, as a rabbi here, I think I have ways of creating, or have the vision at least, and have to find the right channels to create long-term sustainability for the Jewish community, which is why my wife and I, it was really her initiative, decided to raise funds for the mikvah. We went through the right channels and the board and the AGM and all the things you have to do. Yeah. Right? The details don't matter for this podcast.
No.
But the point is that we initiated that. The community would not have initiated that.
No.
Maybe talked about it. Maybe renovated.
Maybe way down the line.
No, I don't think so. They would have patched it up. And it looks a lot of money. So let's put this. Let's put that. There's this problem. They would have been reactive to problems. I understand why. I say that also without judgment.
Yeah.
Because it's the perspective of, let's just keep the ship going until the last person jumps off.
Yeah. My
perspective is, no, we want to build this community. We want to expand. We want to bring more people into Wellington and keep the people. Also have what's the word I'm looking for? Retention, right? Retention is like in marketing. You have retention of your clients.
Your clients, yeah.
You have to have retention of your clients so they don't go somewhere else. So you always have to create new products and new initiatives to establish retention. Never mind getting new clients.
Yeah.
Else your clients will look somewhere else. And that's what happened. It's exactly what happened. People either look to Israel, which is a separate discussion. Which is fine, and I think it's great. Or people move to Melbourne, Sydney, there's tens of families, literally over 50 to 80 families in Melbourne alone from Wellington. The secretary of the Mizrahi is a Wellingtonian, Ray Bauer, right? I look at that, and it makes me sad. It really does. Though I understand her, and I'm happy for her. And I don't judge her. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with what she did. Because as Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, told me when I was picking him up, larger communities are becoming larger, and smaller communities are becoming smaller. Because that's psychology. People want bigger people. That's why people move to cities versus stay in towns. It's the same kind of thing. They want things that are more accessible, as you said, things that are more available. They want more choices. They want to meet more Jewish people. How is my son and daughter going to marry somebody Jewish? If they're in a small Jewish community, they have to outsource. It's more complicated, right? Unless you build it up. And so Melbourne right now is a very long-term sustainable Jewish community. Toronto, Sydney, even places like Denver, Colorado. Then there's places like Portland, Oregon, which is a question. Is it sustainable or is it not? Depends how much money you pour into it. They have a kollel there. So they establish different things. A lot of it around education.
Yeah.
And outreach in order, at least for an Orthodox lifestyle, to be sustainable. You need people who are going to live there. So I know the Spivak family, who I know personally. I work with Meira Spivak. She's runs the NCSY chapter in Portland. It's an amazing job there with her husband, Rabbi Spivak. I forget his first name. I'm sorry. But they do a great job in Portland. Great job. And it's a very reform Jewish town, and they have a very strong Orthodox presence there. The Kollel and a lot of things. They run initiatives for youth, for adults, for young professionals, students, etc. And a lot of it is focused around education, really.
Yeah.
And engagement and services are a product of that. But it doesn't start with the shul. It starts with the education.
Right. So I think that personally I'd lean towards education being the most important.
Yeah. I hear that. Mikvah is halakhically the most important, but education's right up there. I mean, they even say, there's even a halacha. If you're building the Beit HaMikdash, who doesn't build the Beit HaMikdash? The children learning Torah and their teachers.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to come. I mean, it's good as a school trip. It's part of their education.
Yeah, but
you're not allowed to stop learning.
It's not actually just go build.
Right. Yeah. The opposite. You're not allowed to go and build it.
Yeah.
You have to teach them.
Yeah.
Because that is the future of the Jewish people, is education.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people have always been defined as education, in their education.
Yeah.
And that's why the Muslims called us the people of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's who we were. That's who we are, in essence.
Yeah.
And this education is important all around the world. There's billions, if not trillions of dollars.
I think it's one of the explanations as to why, like, per capita, the Jewish people have the most
Nobel Prizes. Yeah, no, that's exactly the reason. Because we've always been reading. We've always been literate. Think about literacy, European societies. When has the masses been literate? 200 years, 150 years, maybe 250 years.
Yeah.
We've been literate for 4,000 years.
Yeah, in terms of literacy, for the world in general, it's a fairly new thing to have most of your population literate.
Right. It used to be the elite.
In terms of Jewish population, everyone learns the Aleph Bet.
Yeah, the Torah is literacy. Our most foundational
basic
values
literacy.
Are literacy.
Yeah.
Right. Literally, what do we get? What defines us as a people? The Torah. What is Torah? A book. Right? That you learn.
Yeah.
Like, it's very simple.
Here it is. Learn it.
The alphabet comes from Aleph Bet. And I'm getting that from Rabbi Sachs.
Yeah.
Right?
Except I've learned people, like, explain that as it comes from Greek.
Well, the Greek came from Hebrew.
Alpha, beta.
Alpha, beta came from Aleph and Bet.
Gamma
is Gimel.
Gimel.
Delta is Dalet, etc. It's not exact, but yes.
No, but like, people explain it as coming from Greek.
Sure.
That's why we have the
and you're saying that's right, and the Greek came from Hebrew.
But that's people stop at the Greek.
Well, fine. But they're wrong, but that's okay. They can be wrong, and we can correct them.
You can argue with us.
You can argue with us, by the way, in our comments. It is our podcast. We will say our opinions. You want to argue with us? We welcome arguments.
Yeah.
And we will respectfully agree or disagree. We're also open to hearing your arguments in in the comments. You can leave comments. Can you leave a voice clip?
Don't think so.
I don't think so.
No.
But leave your comments or leave links to things. And
or like make a video of your own and then link that to us.
That's true. You can also do that. We encourage that for our engagement. So that's why Melamed essentially probably the most important thing in creating long-term sustainability. So really in our Jewish community, we have that, but we do have that as a partial part of our engagement.
And that's where you're talking about the person that could have moved here and there was no Jewish school.
That's right. We used to have a Jewish school here.
We did.
It unfortunately shut down.
I used to attend it.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was a great school. Moriah College. Benia was there. A lot of people were there. They were in charge. They started the Buttons Project that the Holocaust Center took on. Yeah. A lot of great things happened in that school. Auckland, by the way, has a school. They have a Jewish school. Now, a Jewish school, in order to create long-term sustainability, what did they do? They opened it up for Jews and non-Jews, just like we do for the Kindy here.
Yeah.
50, if not 60% of all Kadima schools, like 150 kids there, are not Jewish. not even wanting
And
to be Jewish.
that was the same with
Yes, it was.
with Mariah. We had majority of the students were not Jewish. in
Right.
fact.
And again, that's just for sustainability. By the way, that happens in Melbourne and the suburbs.
Yeah.
Of Melbourne and Sydney, the suburbs of Sydney as well.
Yeah.
Not in Bondi, but other places. For a kindy or for a school, you have to incorporate non-Jewish people as well.
Yeah.
Which is a big debate, by the way. Do you have to, so for sustainability, very interesting conversation I had with a rabbi in Sydney, Rabbi David Blackman. I don't think he'll mind me mentioning his name because we had this conversation and he'll definitely back this opinion. We don't know if necessarily building an entire school is in fact how to run Jewish education. I want to dive into that for a minute. Jewish education means that the kids need to get Torah education. It doesn't mean the community has to take on a school. Those are two different conversations. Taking on a school is onerous. You have to take on the regular curriculum. You have to take, like, a Jewish school is not, even in North America. Let's say I moved to Dallas, and there are Jewish schools there, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to start a Jewish, or I had a community that come with me, right? I wouldn't necessarily start my own school. I actually would not start my own school. I wouldn't also necessarily tell people to go to the Jewish school. Meaning I wouldn't dissuade them, but it's a lot of money. You're paying $15,000 a year, $18,000 a year for each kid, not including trips, not including special things. You know, that's like 2 kids is like some people's yearly salary. Is that really sustainable? Big question, by the way, in North America now. Huge question for the past couple of years. Schools have shut down. Schools have consolidated with other schools. Schools keep going because of $20 million donations. Is that the right way to spend the community's money? It's a huge question, which I won't open up now, but leave it as a question. It's a real big question. And my answer is the most important thing is to give good supplemental afternoon or Sunday Jewish education, or either in the schools or around the schools, after school.
Yeah, and that brings up memories of, say, towards your bar mitzvah. I used to come upstairs from Mariah, come here, put my bag in Mum's office at the time, and then I used to go to the rabbi's office here, and I used to learn with Rabbi Devrat.
That's right.
It was like almost a daily thing.
Oh, it's daily.
Almost.
Wow, I usually learn with bar mitzvah kids once a week.
But I was also learning the whole parsha,
Very
which
good.
was very different.
Right.
At the time.
And also you were here on site.
Yeah, so it was fairly easy to access.
But those sessions I have with the bar mitzvah kids, really special. Really special.
They're good.
And that's outside of school hours.
Yeah.
Like, this community, I think it was a good decision to shut down the school, as sad as it was, and it was sad. I know it was sad. I've heard from even community members how sad it was for them. They went through like a year of mourning.
Yeah.
Like, it was a real shock to the system.
Interesting story. Shabbat 2 weeks ago. I walk out after prayers with my family, and a girl was walking around.
I know who that is, yeah.
Yeah.
She comes all the time. She used to learn at Mariah.
Yeah, she used to learn at Mariah.
Yeah. She has, I think, unfortunately, some mental health issues.
Yes, yeah.
But I know who she is, and I talk with her all the time. I forget her name. Yeah,
Ella,
she walks down Thompson Street.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Ella.
Ella, yeah. That's right. She's very sweet.
I remember her from school.
Yes, no, she's a very sweet girl. She came up to me. I remember Mariah College, and I went here and sold her.
She ran up to me, gave me a hug. She thought I was Nathan, because she actually attended school with Nathan.
But you see...
But she started attending when I was there.
Right.
Yeah.
But you see, like, for her, that will always define her.
Yeah.
I went to this school. Like, for me, one of the things that defines me is what Hesder Yeshiva I went to.
Yeah.
Right? I am a proud Boger alumni of Yeshivat HaGolan in the town of Chispin.
Yeah.
I will always be that.
Yeah.
I also went to, elementary school in Israel, but I don't consider myself like a Boger of that as something of pride.
No, but it's like you think of your alma mater.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Though I'll share with you a story. I was recruiting for Tower of David Museum, and we recruited all over the country.
Yeah.
schools, and I used to travel around the country.
Mm.
They used to rent me a car and reimburse me for my gas. And one time I got like a new Fiat with like 2,000 kilometers on it. I was like, I can't afford this car. This is unbelievable. I drove around for 2 days. Anyways, so I'm driving and I went to Kochav Yair. Now, when we made Aliyah, we made Aliyah to Kochav Yair, which just was like Kfar Saba. You live close to, you live in Kfar Saba. So, yeah, it's the other side of Kalkilia, basically. Good times, Kalkilia. Good times. Used to get vegetables there. Not anymore. Please don't go in there. Not a safe environment. Anyways, so Kochav Yair is very safe, and Tzur Igal, they were building it then. So anyway, I was part of the school. I did grade 5 and 6 there, and then we moved back to Toronto for 1 year. Then we moved to Ra'anana, and that's where I lived for high school until I went to the Golan Yeshiva, post high school.
Yeah.
So I went to recruit the school that was my school, right? And it's basically the same with some minor renovations.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I became like a kid again.
Yeah.
It was like going in there. I was like, oh, this was my school, and I went and I was like, I want to recruit you from Migdal David, and I had this like childish, sheepish, like I was dressed up nicely, right, and I had my professional materials and my spiel and why you should come. They ended up coming, which is great, but I was like, this is a great school. I used to be part of it. I used to be a student, and like, we don't know, hardcore Israelis. Like, oh, that's nice, Like, nobody recognized me because it's been like 25 years, since I learned there or something like that.
It reminds me of
oh my God,
when I was last in Israel. Shoshana and I went to the same primary school in Bet Sefer Yesodot in Petach Tikva. Shoshana went there for 2 years. I started Kita Aleph, but we went in. I think it was Shabbat, so the gates are open so that Chilonim can kick a soccer ball around. And on Shabbat, and we went inside, and we had to look at all the buildings. And I remember, I used to have art over there, and that was my class in Gita Aleph and Bet, and that was my class in Gimel Dalet Hey. And then before we left, and went around and had a look at this. At the school, but like going back to Israel, this is off topic from what we're talking about, but going back to Israel, it like I was a kid again, and it was weird because it felt like that was my world, but in Israel everything seemed so big. Like crossing the road was like, it's a massive road.
Yeah.
But then now it's like this is tiny.
Yeah.
Can't believe the bus doesn't hit more cars on the way, sort of thing.
I know, it's amazing.
And so it's like, my thing that I told people when I came back was, it's either the buildings shrunk or I grew. But that's a...
So again, Jewish education is really, really important. It brings back memories, and it's what defines people, and that's also... what does it mean to be sustainable?
Yeah.
Like for a company or for a community, it means they're going to be still connected to Judaism. How are people going to be connected to Judaism? Well, you need the home to function, especially if you're religious, so you need a mikvah.
Yeah.
And you definitely need, you need a shul, but more importantly, you need Jewish education. If you have to choose Jewish education or a shul, if the shul was just tefillah, right, not a community center.
Yeah.
Right? If it was just for the purpose of Tfilah B'Minyan, then people would choose Jewish education hands down over Tfilah B'Minyan.
Yeah.
The dynamics of a shul outside of Israel is that it's all encompassing a lot of these things.
Yes.
So a shul, for example, has, we have trusts here in Wellington. We have the Hebrew Philanthropic, which is also started by Rabbi Van Stavern.
Yeah.
We have the Dexton Trust, the Chevra Kadisha. Chevra Kadisha is also important if you want to get buried in Jewish places, right?
So it's interesting that on that list there's no cemetery.
I also thought that was interesting. Because you can get buried in your backyard. That's why. Or outside of the city. But for today's Jewish community, I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Very important to have a Chevra Kadisha and a Jewish cemetery. That's why I consecrated the Jewish cemetery in Nelson.
Yeah.
Because as long as Jews are in Nelson, they need a Jewish cemetery. It is a need. Just like a mikveh is a need, a synagogue is a need. It's just the question is where it is on the priority list, right?
Yeah.
But it's still 100% a need, even just for tefillah. It's still a need. It's not a luxury. Tzedakah funds are very important. A beit. So then you get into interesting territory when it comes to a doctor. Well, you need local doctors. You need local medicine.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I'll leave a kollel aside. That has to do with Jewish engagement on a higher level. But basically, the community needs to have Jewish engagement, even if you don't have 10 people studying Torah. You have to have a rabbi, you have to have people, or shlichim, or whatnot, that'll still engage people and educate the community in Torah. We do that to some extent here, although the more people we'd have, the more people we'd be able to get to.
Yeah.
Right. But when it comes to like a Beit Din, the Jewish courts, or when it comes to a scribe, which we do have a local sofer in New Zealand, he's in Auckland, but he can make things locally, and he does mezuzot and tefillin for people. He made birkat ha'esek for all the shechita plant abattoirs we work with.
Yeah.
As a scribe, he made a ketubah for me when I needed. Those are all things that I needed to do. Some of it because of PR, and the ketubah was actually a halachic need, and he is able to make it. Cost a couple $100. They paid him, and he shipped it down, and it was done. And that's relatively local because they could have driven. That's why I say it's local. As long as you can drive to it, it's relatively local.
Yeah. Does that include going on the ferry?
Yes, it includes going on the ferry. Because you can put your car on the ferry. You can't put your car on a cruise ship to Australia. If you did, it would cost you so much money you wouldn't do it. And shchita. So when it comes to Beit Din, shchita, a scribe, and let's say a mohel, those are all things you can outsource.
Yes.
And in fact, we do.
Well, yeah.
For basically all those things. Including Torah books, including even like greater Jewish education. If you want to bring guest speakers, we're bringing guest speakers. If you want, you have to outsource them, just like other communities do. But in London, there's kollels in London. There's a kollel in Minnesota. There's a kollel in Portland, Oregon, which is a relatively small to mid-sized Jewish community. Definitely not a large Jewish community like Dallas, Miami, or anywhere else. Right? Yeah. Or New York, or even Los Angeles, right? So it's really, really interesting what you can outsource. So we have a Sydney Beit Din. We have a mohel we get from Melbourne. Dr. Herschel Goldstein or Goldberg, one of the two. I think it was Goldstein.
I think it's Goldstein.
Yeah, Goldstein. We have the shechita. We bring in Avramo from Melbourne. That's why we do.
Yeah.
But the downside of it is that, like the mohel, I think it's okay to outsource. It's obvious Rabbi Van Savrin was a mohel, and a lot of rabbanim here were mohalim, or they were involved in, or they actually knew how to do shechita in New Zealand because it's so remote. Rabbi Davret was a shochet. Rabbi Lima, I think even Rabbi Mizrahi was a shochet. I'm the first rabbi not to be a shochet for a while, though I do want to learn shechita, and shechita is one of my favorite subjects. But even with Rabbi Mizrahi, he still brought in Avramo, especially for the sheep. But he brought in Avramo all the time. We just planned it. I think he did the Nikur, which I also do. So all those things you can outsource today. And the question is, can this community keep growing in its sustainability with outsourcing those things? I would argue yes. I would argue the more things you can outsource, the less the community has to invest in it.
But then as the community grows,
yes,
you might find those things within the community naturally.
Well, but that's a matter of economics, of supply and demand.
Yes.
Let's say instead of 1,500 or 1,800 Jews in Wellington, you had 10,000 Jews in Wellington. Right?
Yeah.
And let's say 10% of them were from. So you had 1,000 from people.
Yeah.
It'd be a lot.
That's a big number.
How much meat do those people have to consume or want to consume? So you'd either bring in the shochet from Melbourne 4 times a year, or you'd have somebody local who's a local shochet. You wouldn't have to bring them in from Melbourne. Or you train the rabbi to do it.
Yeah.
Or you have a the halal community here has 51 dedicated halal geshuchtim or killers, right? Killers. I don't know what the slaughterers, right?
Yeah.
Halal slaughterers all over the country.
You can call them butchers.
Butchers, yeah, but no, butchers, you run a butcher shop.
It's a bit different.
The slaughter, slaughter. The slaughter. So they're halal lamb kill and halal, mainly for the lamb.
Yeah.
But also for the chicken, right?
Lamb.
And they export most of their products. That's where they get a lot of money, Fians. And the head of Fians here in Wellington told me that those guys work like 2 days a week.
Yeah.
And they live in those remote places. Because there's such a demand. But that's economics.
Yeah.
All it is economics.
That's all supply and demand.
It's all supply and demand. But again, so the question is, but your point is a very important point. It all depends on this. There's a tipping point.
Yeah.
Where you need certain things to be in-house and not outsourced.
So where's the balance is the question.
So it's all a matter of supply and demand. You have to know your own community.
Yeah. And
when do you invest in that? That's really how to engage in this, right? Meaning you have $1 million. Now you want to create long-term sustainability. Don't put $200,000 on a shochet. That's a waste of money.
No.
Right? That's the. So imagine you're playing Monopoly. Instead of buying properties, you want to build up a Jewish community. I do this at the Bar Mitzvah class.
We should make
I do
board
this
game, like an actual board game.
Board game?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But now this is out in the world, so
yeah. Go to Cherem.
Copyright it.
You are putting Cherem. Do not pass go. Do not collect 200. If you say El Malei Rachamim 3 times or Avinu Malkeinu 3 times, you can get out of jail, out of Cherem.
Or the jail is
So what do you buy?
40 makot.
I'm buying 3 types of shchita knives. Like, what do you buy?
I don't know.
But
it's logistics.
I don't know.
It's an idea.
I buy a shul, a small shul, and a Beit Midrash. And you have to pay me now.
And you know that you have Mayfair, or I don't know what it is in the American
Park Avenue.
Park Avenue. So like the big one is like
Beit HaMikdash.
Place in Olam Haba.
Oh, Place in Olam. So you buy Olam Haba, and every time I land on your Olam Haba, I have to pay you money.
Yeah. It's my plot.
Sheesh. Okay. I'll have to think about that one. The Jewish sustainability game. Sold to all 5 people who like that idea around the world. Oh, it could be a bestseller. Then, from people. It's a very niche market. Yeah. All right. It sounds like a good Purim game. So, do you put money in an Eruv? An Eruv is an interesting discussion because, an Eruv is, for those who are listening who don't know what an Eruv is, you basically build essentially a wall with strings, with a lot of different ways of building it around the city in order to build a perimeter, like a wall. And then you have a box of matzah, which is essentially a joint bread, so to speak, and then you can carry within the boundaries of the perimeter that you've created on Shabbat. So, for example, if you want to push a pram on Shabbat, you don't if you want to push a pram on Shabbat, you either can't, or you have to get a pram pusher, as they call them, and you hire somebody not Jewish. You have to pay money, or get somebody to do it as a favor, and you have to coordinate with them. Then you can't call them. So if you're Shabbat observant, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who drive here or take Ubers or whatnot, but for those people who walk, which is a very sizable amount of people. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, there's quite a few people that walk.
Right. Then, then it's really, really important. An air of carrying water bottles. Like I even don't go to the beach with my kids on Shabbat because Eliza won't walk that far, and I can't carry her. Right? Yeah. So we go to do small walks. She wants me to carry her on Shabbat. I can't. I can't take a water bottle with us. Little things. Can't take a ball with us or a frisbee. So I mean, you could live in a Jewish community long term like that. The question is, do you put money in that? And I'll tell you, that's a question about the size of the Jewish community, and it's a matter of risk assessment, and also where you put your money, where you invest your money. Yeah. You can invest money in any. It's basically like a stock market.
Yeah.
You invest money in a company if you think it's going to grow,
Mm-hmm.
even if you lose initially. Because you don't view it as losing money, you view it as investment. And you're going to get your return on investment. So the question is like this. If you build a new mikveh, will they come? Will the community grow? If you build an eruv, will people say, oh, there's an eruv here, so I'll come?
Yeah.
High likelihood that an eruv is really important, even though it's not mentioned on that list. Because people do look for that, because when there is an eruv, people are like, wow, I can be with my kids on Shabbat and live within the boundaries of the eruv and carry and push prams and all that stuff.
Presumably, if you have all those things, you might have an eruv.
Right, but many communities, the way they build an eruv is, once there's a sizable Jewish community, they'll invest building an eruv, which is complicated. Like the eruv in Boston, when they built it there, this is back in the 90s, cost $83,000 a year.
Yeah.
$70,000 to build it, $13,000 to sustain it. They ended up not raising that money. This is U.S. dollars, and they still have it running. But then you have to go to people, donate again and again and again, and it's its own separate fund. The Manhattan eruv, I know the person who runs it because he came to New Zealand for Limud.
Yeah.
Rabbi Adam Mentz. So just the maintenance cost, because they have a full-time person on staff who checks it every Thursday, and cost, and they have a city council, they have a whole system. It's $100,000 US a year to maintain it. That's a very expensive eruv.
Yeah.
But a lot of eruv are actually not as expensive, but it costs money. The maintenance costs money to properly run an eruv and to check it and to fix things. It's logistics, right? Now, is it important? It's wildly important. There's people who would actually go to a city with an eruv and leave a city without an eruv, just like they would with Jewish education.
Yeah, purely.
Or it would be like a tipping point factor. It wouldn't be an initial factor, but it's like if you had two cities, all things being equal, one is an eruv, one doesn't. You go to the one with an eruv.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things. So then the question is here, for example, I'm thinking of building an eruv here.
Yeah.
And it's going to be complicated, require a city council to sign off, obviously the community to sign off, so we haven't done anything yet. I've done preliminary checks, and I actually have a map I'm working on with somebody. So I have a map of where the eruv would be.
Yeah.
It includes quite a lot of Wellington.
That's good.
Yeah. But pretty much the entire CBD as well. And I'm working on Brooklyn. That's harder.
That would be harder.
But anyways, is that important? I think it's important because then we can attract people. Say, look, we have a new mikvah, we have an eruv, we're building up our Jewish education, so come to Wellington. We have a synagogue, we have a community, we have trust, we do have shechita, we outsource the moalim, we outsource the shechita, we outsource the beit din. It's complicated, but we can do divorces and conversions and gitin and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We do have an opportunity to do that. And we don't need a beit din locally here because we have the one in Sydney, even though it's sometimes hard to reach them. But you know what? It's a functioning, working, recognized beit din. We have access to it.
Like we said earlier, it's accessible.
It's accessible.
It's all accessible.
It's a little bit harder, but it is accessible. So you have all these things, but a mikvah I can't outsource, right? Jewish education you cannot outsource. You need it in-house. All these things you need in-house. And so then the question is where to put your eggs in the basket. And that's how I believe building a small Jewish community, building it up, and hopefully sustaining people here. And also, the last factor is kosher food.
Yes. Which last week we talked about the fact that you went on a kosher trip to the South Island.
I did. So Barker's New Zealand signed on as a client.
Barker's and
Pure Oil New Zealand. There's another company that exports honey, so it's not so relevant to us. But we do have a lot of kosher honey here.
But you do quite a few trips like that.
Yeah. Around the country.
Around the
going
country.
even in 2 weeks. So Olivado, olive oil, and avocado oil, and all these different oils, they're also kosher.
Yeah.
Right. I do audits at least once a year. But Barker's is going to provide, for example, jams and potentially chutneys and concentrate and all these things that people eat on a regular basis that right now we import from Israel.
Yeah.
Or from the States.
Yeah.
They're specialty products and they're way more expensive.
Yeah.
And yet Barker's are made locally, it's cheaper. And and for example, that's why I Heksher Delicious Gelato ice cream and Best Ugly bagels.
Yeah.
Right? For like no cost to them pretty much.
Yes.
Barker's pays us money, but the others don't because it was just to create a community need for kosher food. And ideally, like a kosher eating out place, which we're, please God.
Bimhera b'yameinu.
Bimhera b'yameinu. There's no definite plans for that, but that is something that we think about. Why is that important? Because those things like keep people in the city. Why do people move to Melbourne?
Because you have all this.
Because you have all that stuff. You have kosher restaurants. You have different types of restaurants. You have many Jewish communities. You have a lot more politics there. And there's things that are more expensive. Jewish education is very expensive.
Yeah.
Right? That's a different question. Is that sustainable or not? But they offer it in many, many different avenues of that. You have many communities. You have Sofrim. You have a Beit Din that's local. You have all these things that are local. You don't have to go anywhere. And therefore, people move there. And more Jews. And more opportunities. And lots of kosher food. You can get kosher chicken, fresh, cooked.
Yeah.
For Shabbat from the local supermarket.
Yeah.
And you can't do that here.
No.
You can do that in Toronto. You can do that in New York. You can do that in Los Angeles, in Miami, and other places. Sometimes it costs you an arm and a leg, but you know what? You'll do it. Why? Because it's available. It's accessible. I just need a quick meal. Somebody already cooked my Shabbat chicken for me, and it's kosher. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Imagine we can do that here.
This episode is almost the reverse of our advantages of living in the Jewish community episode.
Yes. However, my point is that take the model of what makes a larger Jewish community sustainable and apply it to a smaller Jewish community. That's my point.
Yeah.
My point isn't to let's all go to the larger Jewish communities.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I don't think that's the right solution. I think smaller Jewish communities have a unique beauty in them and they should be sustainable. But if you don't have these things, they will not be sustainable and people will move out. And if you don't get ahead of it, people will look for other pastures, greener pastures.
Yeah.
It's just that simple.
Okay. I think that's all. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with a topic of I really want to do Hebrew versus English.
Oh, all right.
And why English is a bit stupid.
The most random language in the world.
Ever.
We'll talk about 25 ways to spell the word fish.
And why Hebrew is so much better.
Much better.
So much better.
By a lot.
So I think that will be our topic next week. Thank you for listening on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you might be listening. Still not on iTunes yet.
Follow us on Instagram.
Follow us on Instagram, EUTS_podcast. The big circle with an E on it. And yeah, that's all for this week.
Have a great week, Amos.
Have a great week. Argue with us in the comments. We love that.
We love arguing.
Alright. See you later.
Sayonara.
Bye-bye.